Okay, fine. How was Stalin able to do this? What makes the Russian imagination different from the Western imagination? Okay? So I would say three things. The first thing is just intuition. And intuition means that Putin and Stalin, they're able to read the political winds, okay? They're able to sense the mood of the world. The German word for this is Zeitgeist, okay? Spirit of the times. But they're able to sense the mood of the world, okay? Putin knows that the American empire is about to die. And so he feels emboldened to act, okay? So it's intuition. Second is imagination. So Putin and Stalin both have a strategic imagination, which means like, okay, they sense these winds, but they can also imagine, hey, if I did this, how would these winds change? Okay? That's an imagination, to be able to predict or imagine the future. And the last thing, which is the strangest of all, is multiple personalities. Meaning that Putin and Stalin are such brilliant men that they embody multiple personalities in them. And that's why they're so unpredictable. All right? So the example is this. Everyone says that Stalin trusted Hitler. So Hitler played Stalin. But if you just analyze the game, okay, then the conclusion is Stalin played Hitler. You understand? Hitler did everything that Stalin wanted him to do. Hitler invaded Poland, which caused France and Britain to declare war on him. Okay? Then Hitler attacked Soviet Russia, which brought America into the war and helped the Soviet Union become an empire. You understand? So Hitler was completely played by Stalin. And the answer is, so the question then is, how? Okay? Because in June 1941, Hitler did not have to invade Soviet Union, okay? He could have waited for Stalin to invade him. Then the opposite would have happened, right? Then America would have joined the war on Hitler's behalf. And they would have defeated the Soviet Union, okay? So what convinced Hitler to do the most insane thing and invade Russia first? And the answer is Hitler trusted Stalin. Okay, does that make sense? All right? So imagine this. Hitler and Stalin, they're having drinks, okay? They're both drunk. And they're on the porch, and they're staring at the mountains and the moon, okay? And Stalin and Hitler are talking. And all Stalin has to do is say 3 words. And then Hitler is like, I'm going to come and invade you. What are these 3 words? How can Stalin get Hitler to invade Russia? What are the 3 words that Stalin can say to Hitler? I trust you. Okay? I, Joseph Stalin, trust you out of Hitler. I don't trust anyone. I don't trust my own mother, but I trust you, Hitler. Okay? Then why would Hitler invade?
He thinks Stalin is an easy target.
Exactly, okay? Because Hitler thinks now that Stalin is an easy target, as Jacques says. Stalin is a sheep. I, Hitler, am a lion. I'm a wolf. You're a sheep. Therefore, I eat you. You understand? Okay? But Stalin could only do this if he had multiple personalities. Okay? Stalin had to be a sheep in front of Hitler. He couldn't pretend. He had to be. Does that make sense? Okay? So these 3 things are the Russian strategic imagination. The ability to feel the political winds of the moment. The ability to prophesize and predict. The ability to be multiple individuals at once. And that's how Stalin was able to win World War II, and this is why Putin will be able to destroy the American empire. Okay? Any questions? Okay, so Celine asked the most important question, okay? Why are the Russians different? Okay, all right. So the problem isn't Russia. The problem is us, the West, okay? So when we talk about the West, Western thinking, it comes from British thinking. And there are three distinct characteristics of British thinking that's different from Russian thinking, okay? All right, let's look at British philosophy versus Russian philosophy, all right? Okay, the first major difference is that British philosophy tends to be narrow, whereas Russia tends to be broad, okay? The reason why is Britain is an island, therefore it thinks very narrowly about the world, whereas Russia, it's a huge country, it's the world's largest country, therefore it thinks very broadly about the world. And to understand the difference, what you do is you read British literature and compare it with Russian literature, okay? Russian literature, you have Leo Tolstoy, right? War and Peace, and A Karenina, okay? These are very huge epics. And then British literature, you have Jane Austen, Thomas Hardy. They're great, okay? But they're very narrow in their focus. Okay, so that's a first big difference. Second big difference is British philosophy believes in the idea of empiricism, okay? Empiricism is a philosophy developed by British philosophers like David Hume. And the idea is we can only know what we experience. We can only know what we see. Okay? So another word for empiricism is the idea of skepticism. Be skeptical of abstract philosophy. Okay? Because we can never know it. For example, you can never really understand mathematics because mathematics is beyond your experience. Okay? You can only know what you experience. Okay? And it's true. But it limits your imagination, okay? The Russians believe in mysticism. Okay, so they're very spiritual, religious people. So there are forces we don't understand. There are individuals who are prophets, who are sent to us by God. We can never know who they are. We can never know how they think, but we just have to believe that's the case. Okay? So the Russians are going to be much more mystical in their thinking than the British are, okay? And the last thing is the British believe in logic, okay? It's like mathematics. You can go from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5, okay? Everything has to be logical. Everything has to be connected together. Whereas the Russians, they believe in intuition. Okay? You can jump. You can imagine things. You don't have to be logical. Whereas the British say you have to be logical. And these three ideas, narrow, empiricism, and logic, they created the Western mind of today. Okay? So this is what dominates in academia. So when you go off to university, they expect you to think in this way. Narrow, empirical, and logical. Okay? And if you think about it, this is perfect if you want to build a bureaucracy, right? This is bureaucratic thinking. This is the bureaucratization of the imagination. Okay? You're not allowed to say things without evidence and logic and experience. Okay? And the Russians don't have this. So they can do this. All right? Now, there's obviously more good things about this system than about this system. But the problem with the British system is like no great man could ever arise from Western society. Does that make sense? Because all this creates a process-oriented, systemized, bureaucratic style of thinking. Okay? So, for example, I give this talk, right? I could never give this talk in America or Britain because they would all think I'm crazy. Okay, does that make sense? They're like, what's your evidence for this? Wait, are you refuting decades of scholarship about World War II. Are you telling me that Stalin was a genius when no one thought he was a genius? How dare you refute these thousands of scholars who have put all this work into World War II scholarship? Okay, do you understand? All right? So, in the British system, no one like Putin can arise. But in the Russian system, someone like Stalin and Putin can arise. The problem, though, is that what happens if you don't have Putin or Stalin? Well, then then this system becomes very weak. Okay, does that make sense? Okay, so the British system doesn't really need great leaders, but the Russian system, you do need great leaders. And if you are a great leader, then you are allowed to completely follow your intuition and imagination to do great things, like Joseph Stalin in World War II and what Putin is doing today. Okay? Does that make sense? Okay. Any more questions?
What is the relationship between the Greeks and the Western today?
Oh, that's a great question, okay? So last semester we studied the Greeks. And the Greeks are more like the Russians than they are like the British. Okay? So the Russian system, the Greek system, it's a much more natural human system. Okay? And the British system, basically, it's trying to remove intuition and imagination from the decision-making process, from the intellectual process, because intuition and imagination are too mysterious. Okay? So in other words, okay, let's just say that I'm Joseph Stalin in World War II, okay, 1939. For me to execute my plan, I need to write a memo detailing my thinking, okay? Now, obviously, I can't do that because if I did that, first of all, I couldn't execute my plan. But second, it would confuse everyone. Like, what are you trying to do again? Okay, do you understand? Okay, and so the Greeks believed in imagination and intuition as well. Okay, but not the British. And we live in a British system. Okay, all right. Any more questions?
So how much did like the Greek system influence like the current British system?
Okay, so Jack asked a good question. Okay, how much did the Greeks influence the British? And the answer is not that much, because remember, like after the Greeks came the Romans. And the Romans were like this, and there was the Romans who influenced the British, who then influenced the Americans. Okay, so we're living basically in a Roman world as opposed to a Greek world. Right? Does that make sense? Okay. Any more questions?
So the Greek world is basically gone today, or is it influenced Russia?
This is a really hard question, okay? What influences Russia? Well, I mean, what the Russians will say is that they're a Christian nation, that they come from a Christian tradition. And the Christian tradition comes from a Greek tradition, okay? Okay, does that make sense? So Christianity, they would say that Christianity is the main influence, okay? And there's some Greek elements to Christianity. What the Russians say is that their Christianity is a more pure or more ancient form of Christianity, okay? Because remember, like when we study Christianity changed over the centuries, right? So basically, this is a pre-Augustine Christianity, okay? Before Augustine. Any more questions? Okay, great. So